um, any contents that can influence any legislation or election will be removed. But I think they are suspecting us wrongly.
No lah, I got such thing.
That's what we researched from the guidelines.
Okay, we are on live again right now. We just wait for people to
Don't see it.
Yeah, just need to wait for them to come back.
Would a Zoom live not have worked?
This is Zoom live.
No, but this is on YouTube. But there's like direct Zoom live, right? That people can just watch directly through the Zoom link.
Yeah, but we didn't send out the code. We thought YouTube is more convenient. Yeah, we're on live right now.
Oh, there.
It's still not there.
Okay, we're on live now.
On again. No, it's there. Okay.
Yeah, it's here. Sorry for the interruption, everyone. We should now continue with Dr. Lai.
If you want for more viewers first, it's fine.
I mean, are we going to start again? No. Sorry. Or are we getting reported?
All right, sorry for the interruption, guys. Now we'll be continuing with our webinar. May we invite Dr. Lai to share about her perspective now? Dr. Lai, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on this webinar. I would like to raise for discussion two major dimensions arising from the massive infection of the migrant workers. Let me clarify first, though, that I'm not on the front line. Perhaps I'm more on the back line, but I do make regular observations as a cultural anthropologist. And so here are what I have observed. And I think it provides, these two observations will help us understand both the small detail and the big picture, I hope. One of the first dimension is really about Singaporeans' responses to the migrant workers' infection, and also their presence in Singapore in general. Now, we have heard of sometimes very negative responses and sometimes very positive ones. But actually, I think if you put them in total, these responses span a wide spectrum. So don't be disappointed if you hear people say Singaporeans are so terrible, or the other extreme, Singaporeans are so great. I think we really have to look at the range of responses that span a wide spectrum. They can be very negative, some of them, and the negative can subscribe to an us versus them kind of win-lose outcomes and approach. Or they can be rather utilitarian and functional in a cost-benefits approach to what are actually very complex economic and social issues. The negatives can also involve prejudices and stereotypes and processes of exclusion and marginalization. Then on the other extreme end are the very positive and the inclusive in the spectrum, that we are all in this together, in the same ecosystem, in the same society with rights and responsibilities. That's my first point. about workers. I'll elaborate a little bit. But the second point I want to make is also about the place of compassion. Why it is important to have this compassion. And I'm trying to make this point about compassion relevant to this webinar since it's organized by the TheBrightFlipside to collect donations. Okay, but let me deal with the first point about Singaporeans' responses to workers' infection and also to their presence in Singapore. Now, there are so many of these negative responses, such as the most extreme one would be about being xenophobic, really. Please go home, nobody asked you to come, okay? To fear and anxiety of spreading infections to locals, including via their girlfriends who are domestic servants, some of them are domestic workers. Then there's another concern about how a huge jump in the number of cases is changing Singapore's good international reputation of achieving gold standard in the treatment of COVID to now the highest infection rates in Southeast Asia and still growing. So some people don't like that. Then there are those who compare our situation here with the migrant workers with worst of situations elsewhere, where some of the workers are left stranded on their own, no food, no job, no money, can't go home, and literally left to beg for food. So they're already much better off. Then there are those negative responses, such as around habits, largely dirty and unhygienic habits of these transient workers, which is why they get infected. And I think what can be expected in time to come after the quarantines are over and they return to work, whether we can also expect fear and suspicion, scapegoating, another round of xenophobia. That's the negative. But I'd like to also point out the positive, which is tremendous, actually. You get a lot of responses, like in TikTok, when workers film themselves trying to pass the time in the rooms. There are lots of responses, such as, "Brother, please let me help you." Okay, and then of course, NGOs, individuals, and groups, the huge outpourings and expressions of support, donation, and thank yous for helping us build this city. Okay, even FM 91.3 had this message out as well. And of course, there is another very interesting and very important response, and that is WIMBY, not NIMBY. Welcome to my neighborhood, rather than not in my backyard. Okay, this refers to the relocation of non-infected workers to housing estates, such as in Jurong or Bukit Merah. Now, in general, though, there are also these towards the presence of migrant workers in general. There are also indifferent and negative responses, such as, "I don't really think about them. At most, I just see them around." Okay, or "They should be grateful to get jobs in Singapore. They can't get anything like that back home. Nobody asked them to come. Well, they come, they have to accept the conditions. It is their own fault for getting into debts to come to work in Singapore. They can put up with the hard work and the heat. They have these inborn traits to be able to withstand heat and hard work. They are dirty and smelly. They are prone to criminality. And as an anthropologist, I've documented elsewhere how there can even be racism and classism. But essentially, they are seen as very cheap human labor. And that can lead to certain consequences for them, which is not new. It's been pointed out by so many other NGOs and individuals, whether it's about marginalized, exploitative treatment, low wages, overwork, fewer rights, poor living conditions, kickbacks, charges, and deductions by agents and employers, all that sort of thing. But basically, at best, there is some reluctant acknowledgement now that they are indeed equals as humans. All these point to two sets of problems. One is really immediate, humanitarian, as has been pointed out by Desiree, and need immediate and short-term responses. And then there are the longer-term solutions needed for structural change to our model of development that is based on growth. The consequence is high income inequality. Okay? My second point is about the place of compassion in Singapore society. Now, there's some common views about compassion and kindness. Usually it's seen as a soft spot in the individual, even a weakness. And in some corporate sectors, it is indeed seen as a weakness. At best, it's a feeling about doing good to feel good for oneself, doing some superficial good to others that can maybe bring relief, but doesn't really question or change things structurally or fundamentally. But I want to point out some other views of compassion and argue that it is very fundamental to us. I would like to define compassion as the emotional response when perceiving suffering in others and involving an authentic desire to help. Now, it is very closely associated with empathy, altruism, justice, and common humanity. But the main thing really is that it involves an authentic desire to help without expecting anything in return. And in psychology, there is in fact a growing body of science that shows that compassion is actually hardwired in humans, not self-interest. That is hardwired, but compassion. Okay. And this intrinsic motivation to help without expectation of reward is really about elevating our suffering itself, okay, bringing a reward. And the first impulse is to help others. Do not expect reward, okay? And the other important point in psychology is that empathy and compassion is essential for human survival. Contrary to belief, Charles Darwin did not talk about survival of the fittest. He actually pointed out to the survival of the kindest. The kindest. The survival of the fittest was by another chap called Herbert Spencer and the social Darwinists who wanted to justify class and race superiority. So I'd like to focus on this survival of the kindest and argue that compassion is both good and necessary for us, and also why compassion does have the ability to change the world. Because first of all, it broadens our perspective beyond ourselves, it builds connections to others, and then it creates a sense of elevation, which then inspires us to help others and becomes the force behind a whole chain reaction of giving and of goodness, and it becomes very contagious. You just need to ask any of these volunteers and the long-time NGO workers, why are they doing this? Okay, to understand why compassion actually drives them. It's not the salary, obviously, okay? And it's important to have compassion because it also opens up and leads us to issues of common humanity, solidarity, justice, dignity, and here, fair practices, ethics in employment and business. Okay, so maybe I'll stop there for a while.
Thank you, Dr. Lai. In such a situation, when we're talking about such a social issue that concerns lives and survival, compassion is indeed important. What value does the attitude we hold reflect about ourselves? Have we been too numbed by the pragmatism of capitalism that our compassion is fading away? Do you ask yourselves these questions? Thank you, Dr. Lai, for raising up such amazing points. May we hear from Ms. Kokila now?
Hi. Okay. Thank you to the TheBrightFlipside for inviting me to participate. It's really nice to see such young people come together to take action and be in solidarity with migrant workers. So on top of the many valuable things that Desiree and Aing have already shared with all of us, I wanted to highlight maybe one or two of the challenges that I see as really pertinent in what migrant workers are facing now, and then talk a little bit about actions that people can take to support, because that's a question that we're often asked too. And also, I know the Bright Flipside is organizing a donation drive, but on top of donating and volunteering, what are also some other actions people can take if they would like to get involved? Desiree touched on a lot of the challenges that migrant workers are facing in the midst of the crisis. And I think one of the things that makes all of these issues, like difficulty accessing medical care, or whether it's issues with their food or being cooped up in prison-like conditions or any of that, a lot of what makes it worse is the communication gaps, that both they're not able to get the information that they need to understand what's happening to them, and also that they're not able to communicate their feedback and their problems openly, whether on public platforms or even directly to the authorities. And they face a lot of barriers in both of this. So it really makes suffering worse when you're dealing with a lot of issues and then don't have many avenues to reach out. And also no one's really explaining to you why decisions are being made about you, why you're being moved from one place to another, and things like that. Some other things that I wonder about are like why workers don't have the right to say, they're not allowed to order food from outside, even if the food that they're getting is not satisfactory to them, right? When all of us who are at home during the circuit breaker period can have food delivered to us, but this is not allowed for workers. And some of them are experiencing things like the grocery shops in the dorms being overpriced, but even in the dorms where they're allowed to cook, but they're not allowed to get deliveries. And even when volunteers want to do donation drives and deliver food or groceries to them, and dry food, sometimes it's not allowed. So these are the things that I think make their existing suffering worse. And I think it ties to the broader issues that migrant workers face in Singapore on an ongoing basis, in the sense that often their agency or their rights or their participation is neglected a lot, and they don't have a lot of fundamental rights that the rest of us take for granted, like the ability to change employers freely, right? When they're not happy with an employer. And none of us have to pay exorbitant rates to get a job, but they have to pay thousands of dollars to get a job, right? They don't have the right to unionize. And when things go wrong, like when they're not paid salaries or they have a workplace injury, it's very difficult for them to get justice, far more so than for other workers in Singapore, like some of us. So given that I think the issue deserves our attention now, but it also deserves our attention after the pandemic has passed, for several reasons. One, that Desiree mentioned, that there would be continuing, after effects on migrant workers, whether it is with layoffs or transitions back home and things like that, but also because many of the problems that gave rise to this crisis in the first place will continue to exist, like the challenges that workers are facing with their labor rights and with their living conditions. So I want to talk very quickly about some ways that workers' strengths and skills and ideas could be put to use at the current moment, right? So for example, workers could be engaged as ambassadors who can disseminate information to other workers, as information ambassadors, but they're not being invited to participate in these activities and operations in the dorms. They need to be involved in the decision-making about their lives at this point. And also workers have many skills that can be used to alleviate the suffering of their peers if they're given permission to organize, whether it's exercise or meditation or cooking in the dorms, which can all be done with safe distancing rules, right? So in terms of what people can do to support, I would suggest that everyone try to first start from the perspective that migrant workers are deeply embedded in our lives, whether it's our neighborhoods or workplaces or schools, right? So trying to find out about the conditions of migrant workers who work in your estate or work in your school or work with your workplace is valuable. And also through that, connecting with and befriending them and working with NGOs and other migrant-led platforms. Like there's many platforms now that have been growing over the years that are migrant-led, like Migrant Writers Singapore, and we can share a list later with you. But try and find out more about these things and support the initiatives that already exist if you're able to, and also try and read more and find out more about the issues and how you can help. Okay, I will stop here for now.
Thank you, Ms. Kokila. I would like to emphasize on the point Ms. Kokila raised about communication gap and not involving the workers in decision making. That simply adds to the uncertainty and the fear they feel in this situation. Just imagine like you don't even know what's going on and you can't decide for yourself. Now that we have heard from Ms. Kokila, and well, we have also heard from Ms. Desiree talking about the issues migrant workers are facing, while Dr. Lai took another perspective, analyzing the public response. With each speaker dissecting the issue from a different perspective, we are going into a panel discussion for 15 minutes. Audiences, you may send in any questions anytime. Well, to start off the discussion, Ms. Kokila, you mentioned about getting the workers being more involved in decision making. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure. So since one of the issues is the lack of information, it would be possible, for example, to identify workers who can be information ambassadors, who are responsible for both sharing feedback from workers and also disseminating information about what is going on in about the decisions that are being made about their dorm or about their living condition, about their testing, whether it's the COVID tests or like about the community isolation facilities. And I think workers can also be involved in decisions about things like how they can manage their food during this quarantine period. A lot of workers I've spoken to have suggestions for how they can be still cook while practicing safe distancing regulations, or they can import food through stalls, because a lot of their dorms have canteens that can be through life. So, they just, I think it's just involving them in, like, for example, they say that there are fast teams in every dorm. So why can't workers be part of these fast teams, right, that are making these decisions and running the operations on the ground? So those are some. We also know that workers are, for example, organizing things like music sessions with their peers, or arts events and poetry and photography sessions that, asking people to take photos and post poems. So these are efforts that need to be supported. We need to provide resources and support so that do this and feel seen and recognized for these efforts that they're taking. They also asked for things like support with doing meditation or exercise with peers. But, and these are things that are possible to do, again, with safe distancing, but often the workers are not allowed to do anything in their dorms. They're expected to stay in their rooms, be, I think, very passive recipients of all of our decisions and our resources and our ideas, rather than be involved actively in thinking about and shaping what
For raising that point, thank you. May I ask all the speakers, how do you think the public, us as an individual, or any companies as a group, can help the situation? I'll just repeat the question. How do you think us as the public, other than donating or volunteering at the NGOs, can help in other ways? Or can we organize ourselves to become like an organization, or how the companies can actually have more power? Any speaker may respond to this.
Is it just me, or is there a lot of feedback from somewhere?
There's
Like,
a lot of background noise.
yeah, I'm hearing a lot of feedback from somewhere.
I think maybe it's necessary. You want to try? Okay. Yeah, so maybe Dr. Lai, do you want to answer the question in terms of how we can help?
Well, you have asked for donations, and that's what some people can reasonably do or do at most. I sometimes hear snide remarks about how, oh, well, they just sign checks. But if that's what they do, and they do it with a genuine sense of compassion, that's good. You know, that's good. Some of them have lots of money. That's good. Whether it's 1 cent or 1 million, that's good. And I think that there's also a personal motivation and choice involved in wanting to help in different ways. Some of us have more time and resources in our hands, so you can do a lot more that way. I know a lot of retirees or home-based people who can do a lot more. Okay, I was until 2 weeks ago helping to sew masks for distribution to workers, and that was all I could do because I was caught up in something else. So every individual can choose to work within their constraints and their choices. But when it comes to companies, employers, I think it's a different project, a different scale, and it is timely for them as employers of migrant workers to review their employment conditions. Okay, of course they have to. The state does make them do it too. They now have to see to accommodation needs and all the related stuff with COVID. But in terms of longer term structural changes, I think if they want to and they need to build ethics and justice and fair considerations into the employment conditions, now's the time to slowly work it out. I'm speaking very ideally, but I think this is the opportunity for all of us, including employers, to think about that. And also, I feel that as a society, we tend to be very practical, very utilitarian. What's in it for me? How much is it going to cost? But I think we really should ask bigger questions and more deeper questions about, is this all there is to it? Do we just use people and discard them? Do we use things and discard things just like that? Is this the way to go? Or are we going to build other values into how we want to develop as a society? Because once we consider those other values, and I argue for compassion, then a lot of things are possible. Many other things are possible. If we make compassion a core value and central to Singapore society, and it will inform public policy and employment ethics, for example. I'll give you a very small example of what I did. It's just very small. I felt very outraged that the 24 workers were not only dismissed, but they are banned from working in Singapore forever. I thought that was very harsh, just for flouting the social distancing rules. Now, social distancing is something that all of us have to get used to as something new, and there's still lots of people violating it, okay? Fair enough, you have to make some example out of them, but I thought this is extremely overly harsh, even a cruel example, because we're talking about cutting off somebody's income, source of income, and the whole family's welfare hinges on that income. I thought this was extremely inhuman. So I wrote my letters to the powers that be, the respective authorities, and I have 1 or 2 fairly standard responses. Oh, we'll look into it. I had a very sympathetic member of parliament who said, I'll see what I can do. But I also get responses such as, these 24 were behaving rather egregiously, and they were blatant. I don't know how blatant can it be if you sit around to eat, because if you're a worker, you look around for a place to eat and to sit around and eat. And if you are in the company of other workers, you tend to gather together. So I think there should be some nuanced understanding and compassion behind the decision to punish them. And basically the punishment is just too harsh. And sometimes you can see double standards as well, okay? So I think this is an example of how compassion can inform the way we devise policies, we implement policies, and you have to think through the consequences.
I think that's right. We received a question from the audience asking about how can students raise their own awareness of migration and more effectively reflect on their own attitudes.
For Desiree, right? Is that for Desiree?
Who's it for?
Miss Desiree, please.
Sure. Actually, for students, home always does a lot of going around different schools and educational institutions to give talks to students. Sometimes we, if we have the ability to do so, we try to make it an interactive session where they, one of our clients can go there and talk to the students as well and share about their experience. Essentially, what students can do or what they can learn, we really strongly encourage people to gain an immersive and direct personal one-on-one experience. A lot of the issues that migrant workers face, you wouldn't really understand it just from reading a book or reading a paper. You have to get down to the level where you experience and see it for yourself. The level of casual discrimination from whatever quarters of society, the fact that the migrant workers, they seem to exist in a different universe from the rest of us when you try to enforce their rights or try to get anything through for them, right? So our invitation is to experience it for yourself, to volunteer with an NGO, right? If you can't, then maybe if you're still in secondary school, I suggest you could take it up with the teachers in charge at your school and see if it is possible to get one of the NGOs to come down and give a talk at your school for you to gain a better understanding of the issues. There are actually a lot of volunteer opportunities. Of course, due to the nature of the work, sometimes what you can do can be constrained in certain practical ways. But we always welcome a lot of help for home. We regularly have a lot of student interns and volunteers with us, and they're a great help. It's really good to have them around. They not only help, but it also increases their awareness. And it's also very encouraging and nice for the workers that we help to see that the young people in Singapore are so about the issues and care of them.
Thank you.
If I can jump in
Yes,
with some thoughts also and ideas. So I think that whether you're a student or, in whatever area of life you're, or whether you're working or any of that, there's always migrant workers involved in sustaining us, right? So I think students can find out how the migrant workers, because often the cleaners in schools or food vendors for events, their workers are migrant workers. So you could try to find out and document the conditions of these workers and also urge your school or workplaces often use caterers or cleaning companies that employ migrant workers, and they could be engaging migrant workers in a range of other services. So urging your workplace or school to only work with vendors who treat their migrant workers fairly and pay them fairly is something that could be helpful and could be looked into. So I think one is just finding out more, right? Like befriending the migrant workers in your neighborhood, or even writing into the town council to find out how they're treated, like what are their working conditions, what's their pay, because these are areas where you have a stake, like as a resident of a neighborhood, as a student in a school, as an employee in a workplace. You have more power than the migrant worker in that situation does to demand change. And I think using that in a way that is advocating for better conditions can be useful. And also, I think engaging the communities that you're part of in thinking about issues surrounding migrant workers' plight in Singapore, right? Whether you're if you're part of a church, can you persuade them to use their space as a temporary shelter for workers in need? Or would the church be open to running a food program or soup kitchen? So regardless of which communities you're part of, you could try to expand the concern that you have by sharing it with them and inviting them to also take action with you. And we can take action both as individuals and as collectives, right? To hold the government accountable too. Like Dr. Lai talked about how she wrote into MOM to express her horror at these workers being sent back. Now, if you imagine if like 500 people had written in, would it have made them feel the pressure that they have to do something about this, right? Rather than 5 or 10 people. So if people feel able to write in to different parties who are complicit in the oppression of migrant workers, this could be employers, agents, dorm operators, but ultimately the government is responsible, right? So writing into your MP or MOH or MOM about your concerns is helpful. And I think another thing that we can do more is also articulate these changes we want to see as collectives. Like instead of saying I as an individual citizen want to see this change, it is also impactful if we can say we're a group of 50 concerned employers signing this letter, all right? Or we're a group of 100 students signing this letter, or we're a group of 20 artists. So whatever collective identities we can leverage, we should, because it makes the issue more visible. And I think the government is more responsive when they see that we are organized around demanding change.
In fact, talking about advocacy, as a student myself, and today at this moment, we are a group of students that's trying to express our attitude and actually speak up for this. So I think the main point about this is that don't ever think you're unqualified as a youth, and always be free and be passionate and to advocate and engage in social activism. And that's the way students can help. Okay, due to time constraint, we are stopping the panel discussion here. Now may we invite Oasis, Nicole and Nikhil to perform for the migrant workers. Nicole and Nikhil, please.
Hi, I'm Nikhil, this is Nicole, and we're Oasis. I'm Nicole, this is Nikhil, and we're Oasis. Today we'll be performing 2 songs for you, the first being Yellow by Coldplay. We hope you enjoy. Can you hear us? Yes. Okay, that's great. Look at the stars, look how they shine for you, and everything you do. Yeah, they were all yellow. I came along, I wrote a song for you. All the things you do, they were all yellow. So then I took my time. Oh, what a thing to have done. It was all yellow. Your skin, oh yeah, your skin and bones turn into something beautiful. You know I love you so. You know I love you so. they were all yellow. I drew a line, I drew a line for you. And all the things you do, it was all yellow. Skin, oh yeah, your skin bones turn into something beautiful. You long for you, I bleed myself dry. For you, I bleed myself dry. It's true, the cloud is shining for you. The cloud is shining for you. The cloud is shining for. Oh, it's true. The cloud is shining for you. The cloud is shining for you. The cloud is shining for. Forget the stars, the cloud is shining for you, and all the things you do. Okay, thank you. The next song we'll be singing is What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, and we hope that the lyrics are meaningful for you as well. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright, blessed day, the dark, sacred night. And I think to myself, oh, what a wonderful world. The colors of a rainbow, pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies crying, I watch them grow. They learn much more than I'll ever know. Think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. That's all from us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole and Nicole. That is indeed heartwarming performance. Everyone, please donate in the link below or send a positive message to migrant workers in the Padlet. Links are in the comment section. And for now, we have already received $400 in donation, 10 Padlet encouragement messages, and 21 hashtags, #LoveMigrantWorkers. Do add on to this, and I will be reporting the numbers at the end. Now I'll be delivering my ending speech. Well, just as Dr. Lai said, we're all together in the same ecosystem with rights and responsibilities. Migrant workers are no different from anyone with Singaporean passports. After all, looking past race, religion, and statehood, We are all just flesh and blood with the same name, Homo sapiens. We all have a mother, a family, and a beloved one. We all share the softest emotions. When we are locked in a constrained space, no matter at home or in isolated dormitories, we feel unassured. We may feel or we may tear. So what is the difference embodied by these passports? After all, it is merely a few pieces of paper that mean a different set of geographical laws to which we are obligated. Ponder, if citizenship is not a symbol of inherent differences among people, what about the regional identity that shall insert a divide among humans? What about them that shall harden your hearts, such that in a global pandemic, some thought of leaving the vulnerable ones to their misery? The concept of states was established merely for the ease of managing cooperations, but peculiarly, it has now shifted to differentiate us. Ask, if citizenship neither represented an inherent difference between people, nor was meant to differentiate people, migrant workers are simply no less important than Singaporeans. Imagine if the ones in the dormitories are Singaporeans, will we be still saying the same? If not, then what is the difference between the two human lives? Based on what justification are we even establishing a hierarchy among human lives in a matter of life and death? Look on a bigger scale. Distinctions is never the wise tactic to self-protection. Instead, it harms us. Throughout history, we succeeded as a species by unition and cooperation. While in the agricultural revolution, we united to maximize agricultural produce. In the Enlightenment period, we united to share knowledge despite the differences. In the more recent globalization, we connected ourselves and prospered. If everything we have today started with the mere concept of unition instead of distinction, why are we drawing distinctions right now, especially in the face of a collective threat? This issue is something more than just empathy, nor about resource distribution. It is not just about who gets infected. It goes beyond the discussion of migrant workers. The concept of distinction is about how we are organizing ourselves for the future. Distinction over unition only brings us to destruction. In the period of COVID-19, some are neglecting migrant workers just because they're foreigners. We hear the sufferings. In the globe, the same idea shuts 70.8 million refugees out of the safe borders, 70.8 million humans in despair and danger. If we're not recognizing the cruelty of such distinctions, if one day climate change threatens the globe, how do we count on ourselves to unite and combat the collective threat? So ask yourself, are we going to divide ourselves and hence endorse conflicts? Or are we going to unite and thrive towards prosperity as we always did in history? Today's discussion, though centered around migrant workers, brought up ideas that can be reflected in all aspects of life as we interact with diversity, unition or distinctions. Do give a thought, start reflections from yourself. Once again, thank you for attending this webinar. We are delighted to have you here. The Bright Flipside would be sure to deliver your donations and care to migrant workers. If you ever wish to donate in the future, the link will be up. In the meanwhile, do look forward to our future initiatives. Up next, we are sending care packages around the nation, and do order one for a member of the community or anyone you dedicate if you dedicate a receiver. #SG United. Last but not least, advocacy never ends. The ray of light will always shine into darkness. Thank you and see you next time.
Hey, is
Sure.